Hey guys, it's Brian. Today we're back in the garage with the Frostbite JL and we're going to be putting in my new axle. Alright guys, so this is what we're installing. This is going to be a Rubicon Dana 44 or m210. We're going to be swapping it out for my Dana 30. We did get this truss. We did put a diff cover on here and then a Metalcloak fad skid. You'll see that in my other update videos. So we're going to go ahead and throw this on. First though, I'm going to put the HD steering on from Synergy. Alright guys, so we're going to start by replacing the drag link. This is easier to do with one tire still on the ground. It keeps it from turning too much. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the pitman arm side of the nut off. This one we did have to use a pickle fork last time, and we did ended up using a pretty decent sized sledge to get my brother-in-law chases off. I also did have to heat it up with the heat gun a little bit. So let's go ahead and we'll pull that off. That's going to be a 21 millimeter. We'll get that loose and we'll try to get that disconnected while we got the tires on the ground. And then we'll drop the rest of it and get the axle out. Alright guys, so now that we got the driver's side tire off, you can see we got a lot better access here to that tie rod end nut that we need to get off the pitman arm. So it is a 21 millimeter. You can't get a socket on there, so you want to turn all the way driver's side on the steering, and then go ahead and you'll use this closed end wrench and you'll get on here and pull that off to loosen it up. I do have sway bar disconnects. If this does get in the way, I can just disconnect this real quick and push it up out of the way for us. Alright, so now that you got this loosened up quite a bit, not all the way off, so then once this pops out, it'll drop and catch it so it doesn't hit the floor. You will get your pickle fork in here and you'll get your big hammer. You're going to need a whale on this until this pops loose with the pitman arm. So let's go ahead and we'll do that. Alright guys, so we finally got that nut off. Just like on my brother-in-law's Jeep, we did have to heat it up quite a few times. We did mushroom our pickle fork pretty good, but we were finally, with the two of us, we're able to get it off finally. So you see it dropped down, that's why you leave that nut on. So now it's in there loose. We can go ahead and pull that and put the new Synergy one on now. Alright guys, so now that we got the Jeep up on some big jack stands, we got it supported well, we put the tires underneath there for safety. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start unhooking all the stuff we need to drop this axle out. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to pull steering. We're going to have to pull the steering stabilizer. I'm going to disconnect our quick disconnects and tuck those out of the way. And then we're going to start loosening all the control arms and getting the shocks unbolted. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, one more thing that you guys are going to need that probably not everybody has is a 36 millimeter. I've heard it debated. Sometimes it's a 35, sometimes it's a 36. That's to go ahead and get the axle shaft nut off here at the hub. It looks like 36 is a little loose, but it should do the trick. 35 might fit on, but it might be tight. This should do the trick though. You want to make sure you have one of these because you're going to want to take these nuts off because we are swapping this whole brake assembly over to the new axle. Alright guys, let's get at it. Alright guys, so what we're going to do is go ahead and get the rest of the steering out of the way. You're going to want a 21 millimeter to go ahead and pull the tie rod ends off. And then you're going to need an 18 millimeter to go ahead and disconnect that sway bar stabilizer. So let's go ahead and we'll pull that, we'll drop all the steering out, and then we'll work on the suspension. So when you're going ahead and trying to zip these guys off, guys, you want to make sure that this head doesn't pop up. It is just indexed into the top there. Sometimes it can pop up and just spin and it won't loosen for you. So go ahead and you want to be careful with that one. And then also you want to be careful with this end of it. It's got a flag nut on there. Last time I did my suspension, I had my hand in there and it started propelling around. It actually got my finger pretty good. So you just want to make sure that you're not getting that. I'm just going to do it by hand the rest of the way just to get the last few turns off. Alright guys, this is the end you're going to want to watch out for. It does barely catch back there, so when you're zipping it off with the impact, if you have your hands back there, this can catch it. So you just want to be careful with that. We aren't reusing this, we're actually going to be relocating this to above the tie rod, so we won't need any of these. And these ones come out a lot easier than that pitman arm side. These actually just kind of fall right out. So no need for that puller. You want to be careful, you don't want to drop these on your toes or anything, so just leave them on a thread or so. And we'll go ahead and get the other side and we can pull the whole steering out. So again, this is going to be that 21 millimeter. The new one's going to be a 22 millimeter for the Synergy one. So you want to make sure you have your closed end box wrenches for these. That'll help quite a bit on the install. As you can see, we probably won't be reusing that rod end. Okay guys, now that we got the steering off, I want to go ahead and pull the brakes and the hub assembly and the knuckles on each side. We are going to be reusing these. So what we'll need to do is pull the brakes and the hubs. But before we start doing that, is we do need to get that big nut off there with your 36 millimeter or 35 millimeter socket. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a breaker bar in here to support these so it doesn't spin free. And then we'll get these guys loose. These are torqued on there pretty good, so we do want to break those loose before we have the axle out of the vehicle. Alright, so we actually went ahead and I had her jump up in there and put her foot on the brake, and that actually was enough pressure for me to go ahead and break those guys loose and get those off. I like that way a little better than doing the breaker bar thing. It's easier and you're not going to goober up your threads there at all. So we got both those off, and for those of you who want to know, the nuts that come off the Dana 30 do work on the 44 axle outers as well. So if you see they thread on there, they thread on there just fine. So we will be reusing those. The new one didn't come with those, so we'll transfer those over. So now what we're going to do is pull brakes and pull knuckles. Alright guys, so now we're going to go ahead and pull the calipers off. So they are these larger 21 millimeters right here. You go ahead and pull those off, and then we can get those out of the way. Interesting, my top one was nice and tight, but my bottom one was loose. So make sure we go ahead and torque those to spec when we're all done, and I'll put a paint pin mark on there too so we can check those periodically. Alright, so you guys are going to want to go ahead and support your calipers out of the way. Once you go ahead and get those pulled off, I use some heavy duty zip ties just to zip tie them to the frame. I also disconnected the brake line bracket here. Now we're going to go ahead and take our ABS line off and get that out of the way. Then we can pull our rotors off. We will need a little star key for that. And then we're going to go ahead and pull the hubs off as well. And then we can get to the ball joints. So let's do that. Alright guys, so to go ahead and get the rotor off, you do need a T30 star bit. We're going to go ahead and put that in here. They just use that little bolt there to retain the caliper so it doesn't fall off. So we'll pull that off, and then we can get to that ABS sensor. So this is going to be your hub, and then here's going to be that ABS sensor. That is going to use a little Allen key right here. If you want to take a look, it does use a little Allen key. We'll go ahead and pull that off. You do want to be really careful with these, and we'll tuck these out of the way. Then we can go ahead and pull those ball joints off. Alright guys, so the ABS sensor is going to be a 3/16 Allen. So we'll go ahead and we'll pull that out. It just comes loose like that. I'm going to leave that loose for now. We're going to pull this heat shield off so we can pull it through there without bouncing it off everything. Alright, so this is going to be a 10 millimeter. There's 3 of these bolts holding the heat shield on. We'll pull that guy off real quick. Alright guys, so you're going to want to real gently wiggle this ABS sensor out. These are extremely fragile and they are expensive if you break them. So you want to go ahead and tuck that out of the way. I might get a little Ziploc baggie and just put that around it, and we'll put it up here in the frame so there's no way of it hurting it. Alright, now that we have the brakes and the sensors out of the way, we're going to go ahead and pull the hub assembly off. That's going to be these 12.13 millimeter bolts here. There's 3 of them. There'll be one on the opposite side. It is fairly tight, so you might need to go ahead and get an open or a closed end box wrench to go ahead and get those loose and get those out. I'm going to start with this. And those are in there pretty good. You want to make sure you get on those good so you don't strip them out. Alright, so we had to go ahead and pull this hub off because we do want to pull this axle shaft out. What we'll do is we'll pull that all the way out. That way it will gain access to the upper and lower ball joints. So we can go ahead and we can get these loose and we can drop the whole knuckle off. So let's go ahead and we'll pull the hub off. Those bolts come out and this should come off. It might need a little persuasion because it is on the knuckle here. There you go. That's going to be the passenger side hub. So now we got that half of the shaft out on the passenger side. You can see this is where it goes into the FAD module, and this is where that collar will slide to engage four-wheel drive. So now we got this out, we've got plenty of access to those ball joints. Alright guys, so you want to get some pliers, I'm going to go ahead and we'll straighten out these cotter pins. We're going to pull these guys out so we can gain access to those castle nuts so we can get those off on the ball joints. One thing I did notice, my axle must have been overfilled in the front because I do have a bit of spillage. You want to just be careful and put a bucket down, that way we're not getting stuff all over your garage floor. Once I did pull that shaft out, it did start leaking. I do have it pretty horizontal, so it must have been just a little too full from when I did the diff covers. So we'll go ahead and we'll get these guys off and we can transfer these to the new axles. Alright guys, after you get those cotter pins out, you can go ahead and take these castle nuts off. They are 22 millimeters, so you just go ahead and use an open end or an impact if you want on the bottom one. This one you'll probably have to use the closed end here. Mine were extremely loose on the bottom ones. I did have some popping in the front end, so I think maybe that was due to that. We'll see. This upper one was a little tighter. When you go to retorque these, you do have to tighten the lower one first to about half tight, and then you come up, do the top one full tightness, and then you come back here and you retorque the bottom. It sets the preload on them, and that should get rid of that popping when I do that on the new axle. Now that we got these loose, you want to leave these nuts on. These might need some persuasion as well, just like the tie rod end. So what we're going to do is we'll hit on here on a flat surface here, and we'll pop this out hopefully. So while we work on whacking that off, I did go ahead and pull off the ABS line bracket. So that does go right here, like so, and this kind of retains the ABS lines. So what I'm doing is I pulled it off. Here's a little 10 millimeter. I'm going to transfer it over to the new axle. The problem is with the new axle, I do have the Apex c-gussets welded on, so this bottom part isn't retained. So I'm going to try cutting it right here and bending this, and then we should still be able to use this bracket so we keep our lines out of harm's way here. Alright guys, so I went ahead and modified this bracket. I did just end up cutting it right here. That seemed to work best with the c-gussets here. We do still retain one of the plastic clips and then this part of the bracket as well that brings it over to where it goes into the hub. So I think this will be nice, that way we don't have our ABS lines loose, and it was pretty easy just to cut that. It's pretty weak metal. So let's go ahead and we'll tighten that back up so we have this for our other axle. Alright guys, so we did go ahead and get the knuckle off. You do want to use a decent sized sledge to get these off. Just takes a few whacks and we'll get this off. You do want to leave the nuts on there, that way it doesn't fall down and hit the ground. If you do notice, this is aluminum, so it does get a little deformed. You do kind of want to hit right about here to pop these guys loose. So now that this is off, we can transfer all this to our new axle, get that ready to go, and then I'm going to pull the other side apart, same as this side, and then we can go ahead and undo the suspension and roll that old axle out. Another thing to note about these new ones, on this upper one it does have this plate. You do want to make sure that you transfer that over with these. Alright guys, so now that I got the knuckles off, you can really tell that my ball joints are pretty loose. They're quite a bit looser than the new axle, so these are probably on their way out and needed to be replaced. Dana Spicer does make HD ones that are all metal on the inside instead of plastic, and should get rid of that and make these a little tighter. That might be an upgrade I do in the future. But for now, our newer axle, the Dana 44, has a lot better ball joints, so that should be an improvement along there. So let's go ahead and we'll pull the other side off. So now that we got all the steering, the knuckles, and everything off, we went ahead and disconnected the track bar, and I've loosened all the control arm bolts and pulled the drive shaft off. So now what we're going to do is slowly lower this down. We'll get it on a cart, roll this out of the way. You do want to make sure you got those ABS lines clear and your FAD module wiring as well. Those are all unplugged, and the little breather hose here. So this should be good to go. Once I get it all the way down on the ground, we'll just pull those bolts out and we'll pull it away. Now that we have everything loose, we made sure nothing's catching. We dropped this down a bit. You do, if you have aftermarket bump stops here in the front, you do want to go ahead and remove those. We do have the coils loose, but we got to pull these out to get the coils out of the way. Once those are out of the way on both sides, I'm going to go ahead and unhook the control arms. We'll get this one out and we'll throw in the Dana 44. So guys, that's going to do it for part 1 of this install video. Go ahead and like and subscribe and stay tuned for part 2. On part 2, we'll be throwing in that new Dana 44, so stay tuned.